Alan Watts, in his book Nature, Man, and Woman, offers a kind of critique of Christianity and its relation to the environment. He writes, "It has seemed well nigh impossible to relate God the Father, Jesus Christ, the angels, and the saints to the universe in which I actually live. Looking at trees and rocks, at the sky with its clouds or stars, at the sea, or at a naked human body, I find myself in a world where this religion simply does not fit. Indeed, Christianity itself confirms this impression, since, quote, my kingdom is not of this world. Yet if God made this world, how is it possible to feel so powerful a difference of style between the God of church and altar for all his splendor and the world of the open sky? I have found it a basic impossibility to associate the author of the Christian religion with the author of the physical universe. This is not a judgment as to the relative merits of the two styles. It is only to say that they are not by the same hand and that they do not mix well together." Jane Zepka writes, "May we bring ourselves and our stories to church this morning and consider the blend a blessing. At no time in our church year do we encounter such a blend as we do on Easter morning. And when Easter and Passover coincide, as they do this year, the blend is even richer. This is a time to celebrate our Jewish and Christian roots, to acknowledge our debt to the ethical teachings of both, and to their collective struggle to uncover the deepest meanings of life. Passover is the great spring festival of the Jewish people, but it actually began as two separate fertility holidays. One was a farmer's festival called Matzot that celebrated the spring grain harvest. Flat bread was made from the unfermented new grain to dramatize the change. The second was a shepherd's holiday called Pesach that celebrated the birthing of new lambs and kids. A feast of lamb was consumed, and the blood of the lamb was used to ward off evil spirits who were abroad in large numbers in this season of fertility. King Josiah, as a descendant of David, combined these two festivals and also attached to the spring celebrations this historic event of the flight of the Jews from Egypt and the passing over of the Jewish children. Thus, the Exodus was glorified and was turned into a national epic to stimulate Jewish pride and unity. And then the priests got a hold of it, and they made Passover, or Pesach, the holiday of the year. Moses was made the human star, and God the divine star, and Passover was molded into a tribute to divine providence and given the status of super miracle story of the world. It's considered by most Jews to be the most spiritual of all the Jewish holidays, celebrated by a ceremonial meal, the Passover Seder. For Christians, Easter is the miracle of the resurrection of the risen Christ. In Christian churches with a liturgical tradition, Easter is the high point in the annual reliving of the Christian year. It is the time to proclaim the good news of salvation as the central message of Christianity. Easter stands for the resurrection of Christ's body, with the promise that we too will rise. Like Passover, however, Easter has multiple meanings. It falls into a common pattern of spring festivals found in many parts of the world. In early agricultural times, the cycles of the seasons were very important, and rites and rituals were developed to assure that a new cycle would begin. These festivals were so important and deeply ingrained in the lives of the people that neither Judaism nor Christianity could eliminate them. What they could and did do was to attach biblical stories to ancient seasonal festivals, especially the spring ones. Easter has gathered up and transmuted many of the nature rites that go wide and deep in human history. From time immemorial, the Easter season has seen observances about the victory of spring over winter, of life over death. The word Easter originally meant the celebration of the spring sun, which had its birth in the east. Easter and the German word Ostern come from a common origin word, Öster, which to the Old Norse meant the season of the rising sun of new birth. East is from the same root. While the struggle between summer and winter went on, many symbolic celebrations were held to ensure the blessing of fertility, like the symbolic plowing of the earth in early spring to make the earth fertile, and sprinkling girls and women with water to give them the blessing of fertility and good health, a ritual still practiced, by the way, in the Unitarian villages of Transylvania. The Easter egg is probably also based on fertility lore. It was a startling event to see a new and live creature emerge from a seemingly dead object, and the egg became a symbol of spring. We find the egg in the myths of many peoples as life-giver. Some creation stories even have the world hatching from a giant egg. Yes, before Easter, before Passover, were the spring festivals to connect with the mysterious forces of nature, of the earth and sky, of the rivers and the sea, of the sun and the moon. We celebrate them still, translating ancient language into understandable English for our times, for our mindsets, which perhaps 2,000 years from now might seem as strange as the time of Jesus seems to us. These are the days of spring that we should live to the fullest. Love one another and this world our mother. These are the days to live life fully, joyfully, and deeply, to forgive those who have wronged us, to help one another, to celebrate the religious search and the wealth of cultural diversity through worship, to sing our songs of meaning, and to feed the poor, clothe the naked, and house the homeless. To me, this is the essence of not only Easter and Passover, but of human spirituality. It troubles me that because two religions have decided their spring celebrations now concentrate on events which define who they are religiously, they assume that those of us who might not be able to fully embrace their stories are somehow lacking in spirituality. I feel sad that their emphasis is on miracles, that believing miracle stories which are particular only to them, and their insistence that believing these stories is what makes someone a good Jew or Christian or person. And, truth to tell, I don't find the insistence that the risen Christ is the only way to salvation, or the Passover story is what makes Jews special, is very spiritual. I think it is more an example of pious religiosity, not spirituality. Now, spoiler alert, I am not a big fan of spirituality as it is commonly defined and practiced. I have given sermons denouncing spirituality as too soft, too undisciplined, too personal and selfish, too loosey-goosey, and basically meaningless, since it is different for everyone and has no common core to hold people together in community. One of my sermons is titled, "I am not spiritual, but I am religious," turning around what most people like to say. Yet, I have to admit that in the spring, I feel stirrings of love and hope, connection and wonder that might be called spirituality. It has to do, of course, with the visible renewal of life in nature, watching the earth transform from darkness and death to light and life and beauty. When I see the first flowers emerge, or go stalking the wild asparagus, or experience the birds returning, my heart fills with gratitude, and I realize that there is something wonderful, call it nature, that is powerful and pervasive. I guess that's why we celebrate Earth Day at the same time as Easter and Passover, although I have to tell you, it surely puts a strain on a minister trying to include all three. Spirituality to me is what I feel. It's an innate mark of being human. Consciousness is spiritual. I think spirituality provides meaning and values without a God telling us what is right and wrong. Perhaps it is a substitute for being godly. I have to disagree with my Funken Wagnalls when it defines spirit and spirituality as independent of and opposed to the natural world. My experience of the spiritual dimension of life grows out of the material world and functions not to deny that world or my knowledge of how it works, but rather to broaden and deepen my understanding and appreciation of it. My experience of the spiritual dimension of life is that it reminds me that just outside the normal range of my vision, there is a world of truth which I seldom see, but which serves to broaden, deepen, amplify my understanding of myself, of others, of the world, and of nature. Spirituality begins where life begins, and that is why I chose to speak about it at this time when the spring festivals remind us that life begins anew. I find much of my spiritual spirit uplift in nature. So it seems appropriate that Passover and Easter were originally celebrations of nature. But in order to truly appreciate nature, in order to fully live in nature, we have to do more than talk about it or devise rituals to honor it. We must approach it with our total being, with a sense of spirituality, which is a quality of consciousness and a quality of experience, embedding ourselves fully into it. It is that quality of consciousness in which we are simultaneously aware of our individuality and our universality. At one and the same moment, we know ourselves to be absolutely unique and also a fragment of the totality of life. In moments of spiritual consciousness, this state of awareness pervades all of our modes of knowing, intuition, feelings, body, and mind. Spirituality is also that quality of experience which is holistic, when we know that all reality is one. It is grounded in awareness of the present moment and informed by the knowledge of the past. It sees truth, both within itself and without, and holds it with love and compassion. It holds highly the paradox between the uses of reason and the knowing that comes through intuition, and does not need to resolve it. It accepts both. Often, it is characterized by a profound sense of wordless knowing, of deep connection with the earth and an energy source larger than ourselves, of which we are a part. It gives us a sense of belonging, which is innate, as though we are a part of nature and nature is part of us. We cannot change this. It just is. No mistake that we could make would break this connection. We breathe in that energy with all of our being, and it breathes us out, back into life recharged, eager, longing even, to find those places where our gifts and abilities meet the hungers, the injustices, the brokenness of our world. From this place, we offer a double healing, both the work we do and the spirit in which we do it. There is no more chance that a state of true spiritual consciousness will leave us selfishly, navel-gazing, than there is that we can keep breathing in without ever breathing out. It just doesn't work that way. My encounters with the spiritual dimension of existence often seem unrelated to the church or to organized religion. I do not believe it is possible for me or anyone else to organize a spiritual experience on cue on Sunday morning, although some seem to expect ministers to do that. The role of organized religion is not to prepare spiritual experiences for group consumption at specified times. Rather, its function in this regard is to remind us that there are other ways of knowing, other ways of seeing, other realities which have the possibility of changing us as we cannot deliberately change ourselves. One function of corporate religion, it seems to me, is to urge us to remain open to this renewing and reorganizing possibility and to celebrate its appearance among us. So tomorrow is Earth Day. Originally a secular holiday celebrated mostly by environmentalists and peace activists, it has become more mainstream and, interestingly, more a kind of religious holiday. Churches are getting involved in taking care of the earth in many ways, which is somewhat surprising because environmentalists and people of faith have had limited connections since the start of the modern environmental movement. Now, however, spiritual traditions, from large centralized religions to local tribal authorities, are beginning to devote energy to what some see as the defining challenge of our age, the need to build just and environmentally healthy societies. The relation between religion and revitalization of the earth is a strong one. How we choose to live on earth and treat our environment are questions with deep moral and ethical dimensions that need to be debated not only in the arena of public policy, but also in our churches, synagogues, and mosques. There are many good reasons for religions to be primary participants in the effort to improve the environment. Although it is true that they differ in approach and belief, all major religions have concern for nature, for taking care of the poor, and preserving creation embedded in their beliefs and scriptures. Even though some differences in worldview produce opposing positions on sensitive issues related to ecological issues, such as the Catholic view on contraception, it is still true that overall religions can play a positive role in building a just and environmentally healthy society. Perhaps the most important function of organized religion is to teach us and help us and admonish us to put our beliefs into practice. And right now, as we celebrate Spring Renewal and Earth Day, it is imperative that we do everything we can to stop climate change and protect the earth. We all know how vital that is, and we also know how to do it. We just need the incentive. Perhaps the incentive is the spirituality which provides awe and wonder as we interact with nature and the universe. Sara Campbell writes, Easter was a resurrection of many souls, not from death, but from deadness. What do I mean by deadness? I mean the things inside that kept the disciples away from Jesus' funeral: fear, cowardice, lack of conviction and purpose. And I mean those same things in our own lives that prevent us from feeling alive. Things like fear, cowardice, and a lack of conviction and purpose. And things like the loneliness, grief, and boredom that numb us to life. It's as if we let parts of ourselves die and stuff them away in a tomb of the soul. End quote. At times, this may be necessary, but we must eventually seek to be reborn, to move the stone from the front of the tomb and seek life in place of deadness. Like the crocuses that push their way up through the hard earth to announce spring, our inner births have their own cycles. The same power that feeds the flower and gives us life is the spirit within that will be reborn again and again. The power waits, dormant to our senses, until the time is right. The blend of stories, religious, spiritual, and natural, that accompany the transition from winter to spring do indeed give us reason to celebrate. Not the deliverance of the Jews or the resurrection of Jesus, but the deliverance of all of us from prejudice and ignorance and the resurrection of the earth from its winter hibernation. Robert Walsh writes, maybe the ancients were right. Maybe spring comes because we bid it to come in our celebrations. Maybe it is the telling and retelling of the stories that enable us to see that hope still lives and that we can carry it forward. The stories make it clear that God does not do it alone. The motions of the spheres will produce a sunrise, but the springtime of the Spirit, the springtime of love and justice, depends on our human response to the gift of life. And yet, what power and glory, what hope and comfort have come in the telling of the Easter and Passover stories for 2,000 years. The death of Jesus was not the end of hope, not the end of love, not even the end of the spirituality which would continue to inspire people over the centuries. So for Easter, for Passover, for spring festivals, we translate old words into new understanding and meaning, archaic, unbelievable myths and miracle stories into rational ways of living and loving. These are the days of the turning of the seasons and of our lives. So rejoice in the good and grieve for the sad. The great cosmic circle turns another notch and time goes by. Let us learn the spiritual value of our time and not waste it. Let us learn to fully and fearlessly love ourselves, one another, the earth, and all that dwells therein. Let us celebrate life, have faith in the power of love which never dies, and let us share our bounty with one another, that all may have life more abundantly. Spirituality is, finally, the consequence of the universe surprising us, jolting us out of our quiet little convictions, and confronting us with those larger truths we have always known and keep forgetting. If Easter and Passover help us to remember those truths, so be it. The closing hymn is number 308, The Blessings of the Earth and Sky.